along those lines. So obviously I have the much coveted 10 minutes before lunch talk, so I'll try to be fast. So I'm going to be developing some of the stuff that Christos talked about, taking this NEMO model in a different direction. Specifically, I'm going to talk about what you can do with sequences of assemblies in this model. And this is a question I worked with Christos in my advisory session. So there's this basic question, which of course we're all interested in. How does intelligence arise from the brain? So here's this view that Christos has already elucidated to some extent, where we have these precise models of individual neurons, and then we have these sort of high-level correlations between brain regions and cognitive phenomena. And a lot of people are interested in trying to bridge this gap between how we get from neurons to things that we recognize as cognition. So one question is, what is sort of the role of like computer science or algorithm design in this conversation? So let's say that you have a biologically plausible, as far as we know, model of the brain, and you want to decide without having to make a bunch of really, really detailed recordings whether it's a reasonable model. So here's one idea, which is just start with some basic cognitive problem that you think is important and that brains are often solving, and then try to give an algorithm within your model that solves this problem, and it should be hopefully a simple one that arises very naturally. And then hopefully you would also accompany that with testable predictions of what this algorithm would look like, so you could somehow verify it from, or start to move in the direction of verifying it with the data that you do have. So here's this model of the brain that, again, you should be familiar with by now. The important ingredients, just to refresh your memory, are basically that it's a dynamical system. The state is the firing neurons and the weights between them. And then the update is just this K winners take all, which models local inhibition, and then Hebbian plasticity, which is how it learns. The key ingredients here are really random connectivity, inhibition, and then plasticity. So what can this model do? Like, what sorts of algorithms can it implement? Well, we already know one, which is this basic, very grounded form of language learning. But since connections are random, a lot of other things are actually quite hard. Like even memorizing things is difficult since you're not guaranteed that two neurons have a connection between them. So as algorithm designers, all you can really do is lay out different brain areas and describe how they're connected and then see what happens when you turn it on. So assemblies in this sort of random framework makes sense because they're a way to ensure that two different representations of different things are going to have a connection between them. Just take a bunch of neurons and say that these are the representation of the thing. So by an assembly here's a slightly more grounded definition. I just mean it's a set of K neurons, K is the winner-take-all parameter, which fire together. And we'll say that they encode a concept because that's helpful for thinking about this. Assemblies emerge rapidly in NEMO just when you fire some stimulus, a stimulus assembly over and over again. You get a copy of it in another area that it's connected to. And then later when you fire the stimulus assembly, you'll immediately recall the assembly that you formed due to plasticity. So here's sort of a basic problem beyond just this memorization of a single thing. Let's say every day on your walk to work, you see the same sequence of houses. You see a blue house, then you see a green house, then you see a yellow house, and then you see a purple house. Well, in the future, here's you're a brain with an eye attached to it. You see the green house, and you should have a prediction of what house you're going to see next. This is a simple problem. You know you're going to see the yellow house just because you see the same sequence of houses every day. And then after that, you'll probably see the purple one. So here's how you can sort of imagine that this naturally emerges in this model. So you have some sequence of stimuli that look reasonably different that's presented, say, from some high-level stimulus area. This evokes some sequence of responses, assemblies, which is over in this area. So you have your first thing, this causes something to fire. Your second thing, this causes something else to fire. After enough presentations, the entire sequence of assemblies will fire when just the first one is fired. So this is what we mean by memorization. So I see just the blue house, and now my representations for the green, yellow, and purple houses will then also fire in sequence. And the same holds also if I started in the middle of the sequence as well. So this is just memorization, but there's lots of more complex operations and sequences that brains seem to be able to do. I mean, language is an obvious example, but also you could memorize and traverse more complex graphs, like, for example, a map. You could recognize some language from some class of languages, and you could make sequential decisions. So what I'll talk about next sort of unifies all these things under certain assumptions. Here's a quick refresher on what automata are. So a finite state machine is just a set of states, and then you have transitions between these states that are governed by the input symbols. of your alphabet. So for example, this is a finite state machine that does base 2 addition. This sort of captures the class of algorithms that don't require any memory, the ones that you can do by just keeping track of a constant number of things. And then more complex automata, like say a Turing machine, sort of the model of general computation that we recognize, is just a finite state machine with a more complex and potentially infinite source of memory. So finite state machines are sort of the first problem to solve when talking about a computing system. So I'm going to describe a finite state machine simulation in NeMo. The way that this works is that we assume that we have symbols representing, or assemblies representing symbols in a symbol area and a state area. And each of these symbol assemblies and state assemblies project to an arc assembly in another area. And so we then link this arc assembly to the appropriate next state. And so this does the entire structure of the finite state machine. It's all just encoded in these strengthened connections between these three areas. And here's sort of what this looks like. So you can see this is a finite state machine that recognizes strings that are divisible by base 3, or divisible by 3 in base 10. And so you can see here's a string which looks like 3, 0, 4, 1, and then it ends. And then it keeps track of what the current modulus is, base 3, and then it accepts because at the end it's in mod 0 state. And this is from actual data that I ran, a little simulation. And then on to general computation. So the point is that with a finite state machine, it has to have output, but that's easy to do. We have a simulation of just the head of a Turing machine. And then for the tape, you can assume, like we do in real life, you have access to some source of memory, like a stack of index cards. And if you have a motor system, you can write on it with a pencil. So there's a way to formalize what we mean by a motor system, and then simulate just the head using NeMo and then the memory with the environment. Otherwise, you can also construct a tape that you can simulate with assemblies, and the area-wide inhibition that Christos alluded to before. And so this gives really a self-contained, hardware-based, biologically plausible example of general computation. And I want to emphasize that I don't think of this as a concrete hypothesis of how the brain does general computation at all. It's just sort of a proof that this framework is Turing complete, which is interesting to computer scientists. Yeah, so that's all I have. These are my collaborators, Christos and Santosh, obviously. And they're both, well, Christos already spoke, Santosh will speak later about other work that we worked on. Yeah, so thank you.
Do we have any questions? I guess I can ask you something that's related to the first talk. Like I can see, like how you believe that this model is simpler than many other models because you kind of reduce, the brain biologically to like a couple principles, right? The recurrence, the long-range inhibitory projections, the excitatory array connections. But I'm just curious, okay, these concepts are to some degree biological, but as Christos said, right, like the long-range inhibitory projections are something that's relatively new, and actually even neuroscientists often like don't account for them. And there's probably going to be more discoveries like these, in the future. And at the same time, the kind of classical machine learning, LLMs, the basic building blocks of them are quite simple. What is your opinion on, what do you think like this approach that you guys are, taking is like, what is the actual like core addition, to our understanding of language and neuroscience?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. So one perspective on this is that it's basically what happens if you only have random connectivity. Like due to the constraints of our DNA, we don't have enough to encode like a complete, network for our brain. So we have to make some assumptions. Like either there's a few circuits that are repeated many times, or all the connectivity or most of the connectivity just looks random. And so this is one perspective, like, okay, if I have just random connectivity, what can I do? Well, with a couple more basic ingredients, you start to see like things that we recognize as cognitively meaningful potentially. The other one is that, if you're sort of working through this and you find that there's not a natural algorithm for a problem that we have strong reason to believe that brains are able to do, this is sort of good reason to believe that we're missing something. And then as we sort of posit mechanisms that could solve this, is sort of a guide for neuroscience as well. Like we think there needs to be something that does this. here's some experiments that could test it. How would you do this? So yeah, but thank you. That's a good question.
Thank you very much. Guillaume Dumas from University of Montreal. I was curious about how to solve reinforcement learning tasks with your system.
Yeah, so this is a great question because right now we don't have any room for reward in the model. There's the only sort of valence of plasticity is upwards, like connections just get stronger. Yeah, which means that, how do I integrate reward, which seems to be sort of diffuse, like it's, it's not really implemented by like some feedback circuit necessarily. It's really like through diffusing neurotransmitters. Seems like we need to add an additional mechanism, and I don't quite know what that looks like at this point.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're going to break now for lunch until we're going to break now for lunch until 1:30. If you are not from here and you're new, let me give you some advice. If you want further and better, you can go down to Bancroft Street, find yourself someone local like Alosha or Trevor or Doris or Nate, and like follow them. If you want closer and faster and okay, then there is a very nice place here at the Haas Business School. There's reasonable food and lots of tables outside. And there is an additional similar one in the law school, which are the two closest buildings for here. Okay? And we'll see you at 1:30.
And let's give a round of applause for